Okay, I think we are all ready to start. So hello everyone. Welcome to this webinar on lab software and compliance. This is the last webinar in the series of SciNote webinars that we did in the second half of this year. I'm really excited about this topic. It's something that we get a lot of questions from our customers, and it's no surprise that actually this was we see the record attendance at this webinar. I'm really happy to be here with Bryan from US Food and Drug Administration, from Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, and Matjaz, our VP of Product Management here at SciNote, who used to be a deputy head of Q&A in an ISO 17025 accredited lab.
Thank you, Klemen. It's great to be here.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
A few details before we go to the questions. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available later on this week. There will also be time for questions and answers at the last quarter of this webinar. If at any point during this webinar you have a question, please post it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address as many questions as we can within the time constraints. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So Bryan, I wanted to ask you, with your experience, if you can tell a little bit about what you do, and also what your view is on digitalization in life sciences or in scientific organizations. Where do you see challenges in the lab? What's your vision of the digital future, let's say?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Klemen. So I work, as Klemen said, I work for the Center of Drug Evaluation and Research, and within that is the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. And I work in a division that is entirely lab-based and devoted to researching drug product quality. And so, you know, we kind of have some unique challenges with, you know, kind of managing our research, as well as just performing it in an efficient way, and being able to communicate within our teams. The way that I see our research now is that, or the way that I see, you know, the digitization of research now is that, you know, the current environment has some pretty remarkable software tools out there. And we, you know, we've dabbled a little bit for a while in this marketplace, and you know, we've discovered these tools that, you know, I think even a few years ago were not, you know, were either like specialized, customized tools, or commercially, but weren't commercially available. And now we're seeing there's a lot of competition in this space, and so not only has the usability increased, but even the affordability has increased in this space as well. And I guess one other point I wanted to make was that you know, the current situation that we're all in with the COVID-19 pandemic has also shined a spotlight on this area. And so it's very interesting. I am interested to see kind of the direction that that this goes in, because I think people are right now and are in the future are looking to digitize. So I would definitely recommend that. Though that's my personal opinion and not necessarily FDA's official stance. So.
Yeah, I completely agree. We've seen a lot of movement towards digital, especially sort of because of COVID pandemic. It was kind of let's say kick in the behind for some organizations that were on the brink of making the decision. But for a lot of them, this is something that they started. A lot of organizations just started exploring this now. So, and they don't have, let's say, good processes in place necessarily how to choose the right software, how to define product requirements. Once you dive in, as you know better than I do, once you dive in, there's a lot of choice. There are a lot of factors. A lot of people have different priorities. Can you talk a little bit about the process and I don't know, some practical good practices for the audience?
Yeah. So for us, in my group, we're actually broken up into 3 separate, you could say, like research focus areas or branches, and I'm a part of the. We have like an operations team within our group that kind of works with all 3. So for us, it was really important, at least at the outset, I would say, for software that reaches to our whole division or our whole group, it was really important for us to just kind of lay out some basic requirements with our management, as well as with our IT folks. And this had 2, we had 2 main reasons for this. Obviously, number 1, if we don't have our management buy-in, then, we're kind of dead before we start. So if they have specific requirements, or, let's say you're looking at a piece of project management software or something of that nature, like, oh, does it have the ability for management to, get a kind of a bird's eye view look in a simple graphic or simple graphical user interface? These kinds of questions that, we wanted to ask our management. What exactly do you want it to do from your level? How do you want to see, how do you want to track progress, let's say? And then we kind of have it in our mind, okay, this is really what they're looking for. This is, what they need. And then with our IT, obviously we need to know, what kind of support they can offer, from a hardware perspective, and like, are they comfortable with the will they be comfortable with the software that we choose based on, the infrastructure they've set up? So with those 2 things in mind, we kind of moved into, soliciting our user feedback. Sorry, not feedback, our user input. So we got, 2 to 3 representatives from each research group, and we brought them together. We also have somebody who is deaf, who can't hear, so we also wanted to get their input as well, so that we can get their feedback regarding accessibility of, the software that we're thinking of, the softwares we're considering. And then from there, we would really begin to define the user requirements. Like, okay, what do you need it to do? What softwares are you using? Like, what would you like to interface with? And, what would you like it to do? And like, what have you seen? That's the best part, is a lot of our analysts not only have, requirements that requirements in mind, but they've gone to, these conferences, or, AAPS or ACS. They've gone to, these conferences or trade shows and seen, different softwares that maybe they really liked, or they thought like maybe that would help. So they kind of became, they became our end users, but also our market researchers. So they had already gone out and seen softwares and were able to kind of tell us like, oh, like, yeah, this is what we're looking for. Kind of like this. We liked this about this software. We liked this about this software. Is there something, in the middle that we can find? And we just, we decided rather than, just picking like one particular software that, like, let's get all of our requirements on, on paper, whether it's, we kind of even broke them down into groups like, interface and, usability and being able to manage projects maybe in one case, and just these subgroups. And later on, that actually allowed us to create evaluation criteria and a scoring rubric that helped us to evaluate and choose a software. Yeah.
Okay. I really like your point about accessibility. Maybe it's not obvious to small numbers of teams, but especially to large organizations, it's absolutely critical. I think that's a great point. And also this, that, you didn't just blindly go and research the market, that you, let's say, valued previous experience, asked your co-workers, maybe they asked around. So I think what we've heard also, that it's useful is really to ask around, because there is no lab identical to another, and you know best who does work similar to you, and just asking around. I think it's a great point. Maybe a question to you. So I assume you then ultimately put a list together that you sort of scored. What do you think? What's the optimal number of vendors on this list?
So in my example, we narrowed our list down to 4 vendors, but they went through kind of 2 cycles of evaluation. So we took our management and our IT criteria, and that really allowed us to eliminate probably over half of the marketplace. So that was helpful for us. And then once we had our user requirements, we could really narrow a number of those other vendors down, like I said, to about 4. And then we began to pilot a few of those, because I think like in between that, in between the timing, we were able to eliminate another one for another reason. So.
Okay. So I assume at some point you gave the access to your users, to your coworkers to try this out. Is this just like basically, here you go, you have your username and password and play around, or was there more structure in how you organized the trials?
So, obviously we want them to, play with the software and kind of try, do things that obviously we hadn't thought of, but also there were very specific things that we wanted them to do to evaluate the criteria that we came up with. So, like I said, we defined the user requirements. Okay, now that we've defined those user requirements, okay, how do we evaluate them? And that's where those subgroups came in. And it's like, okay, like rate the, we could go out and say, okay, rate the interface, but unless we tell them, how to do that, then it's just kind of like a little subjective. So we were kind of like, okay, go out and actually try and use it in like a process scenario. And I mean, at least in our division, we said, okay, work with those processes and see, how easy it is to do that. So we like the idea of the play, like, okay, you guys, use the software as if this is a real life scenario, but also, we need to have some numbers at the end of the day. We need to have some data. So.
Yeah, well, which leads us to, the ultimate question, like how to, you have so much input, you have the information coming from the trials, you have requirements from the management. How do you make the choice in the end? Is there any room for, let's say, oh, this feels right, or is it all just numbers in the end?
Well, I mean, of course we want them to be comfortable. I mean, that was actually one of our criteria. And I mean, of course it's kind of a subjective spectrum, but that was one of our criteria, was usability. And, did they feel like they could kind of jump right in, or did they need more explanation? And so we hope that we kind of evaluated that, even if people, it was kind of hard to put a number on that. We really asked people to put a number on that, even though it's a little more subjective. But in kind of determining our choice, once we really had those core 4 or core 3, we felt comfortable, I mean, obviously we'd reach out to the vendors for pilots, so they knew we were, we're kind of a little more serious than just, doing our market research. But we did want to look at price as well, because, I don't know about your audience, but we had a number in our mind, for, okay, this is how much this software is going to cost. And when we went out and got our quotes, it was actually quite a bit, there was a gap. Some of them were able to provide the same quality of product, but one was able to offer it at a much lower price. So I would say to the audience that, it's once you really get out into the space and start getting the quotes and doing the research, it is a lot more affordable than you'd think. And one other point I wanted to make was that so we did look at it from a price perspective. We did look at it from kind of the numbers and evaluating the softwares. But the last thing we looked at was also not so easily quantifiable, but really it was the willingness of vendors to work with us on customization. Because I don't know about your audience, but there are many instances where we will purchase a software or find a software that we're interested in purchasing, but it may not tick every checkbox for our requirements. And so we want to know, like, okay, is this feasible? Will the company work with us on some of our little tweaks or customizations, just based on our requirements. And so that has definitely been a determining factor in some of our purchases, in some of our purchases.
Okay, yeah, I really like this, how specific you explained this. It's, once you went through, it's maybe an obvious process, but it's a complex one, and ultimately it makes sense to make the decision wisely, because then cost of transferring down the line are just increasing. So yeah, I really appreciate this. I wanted to turn the debate a little bit more towards compliance. So Matjaz, I have a few questions for you. Now we talked with Bryan, how to choose the software, how to get to the choice. But if your organization has compliance requirements, here I particularly mean CFR 21 Part 11, GLP, or any of that nature or equivalents, then it's not just a matter of just choosing the software and purchasing it. but there is, if the software will affect the, or will coincide within the compliant environment, there are some special steps that need to be taken. So Matjaz, if you could just briefly introduce yourself and and just give us an overview of how software and compliance basically work together.
Absolutely. So my name is Matjaz. So I'm working as a product manager at SciNote, and I do have, from my previous life, let's call it like that, experience with working in regulated environments. So to answer the question shortly, so software and compliant or regulated environments do go hand in hand together. So that's a short answer. But there are a couple of things that I think I can maybe point out that the audience will relate to. So I would really like to start by pointing out that there is no such thing as an out-of-the-box compliant software or an out-of-the-box compliant tool, or it's the tools, the softwares are always used in the context of the processes at the company, right? And the tools, including the software and the ELNs, need to be validated in the context of the processes. However, there is difference out there in software. So a software or a tool can go a very long way to help you and your quality assurance team to save a lot of effort when you do need to go through the validation process. For example, a lot of softwares nowadays actually are available as software as a service, right? So this is not just let's say, business model, how this let's narrow down to ELN vendors, how the ELN vendors actually sell their licenses. There's also a lot of other services that may come along with just the licenses. And this is a point where I would actually really encourage everyone who is assessing, or choosing which software tools to purchase, to actually challenge the vendors. Oh, what underlying services, what supporting services do you have, that will help us implement the software? For example, a lot of times the companies offer, for example, validation procedures, the IQ, the OQ protocols, and could really help you implement them in your lab. So this is something that you could really have a look at what actually comes along with those licenses. So sometimes even the cost of license itself, maybe if the license is a little bit more expensive, it can bring some additional services that will then save you some of these hidden costs that really will need to make, that we will actually have to make. And relating to the points that Bryan was mentioning about the user requirements, so there are also other requirements that come from this compliant aspect, and a lot of times or frequently you will actually have to make a vendor audit at the ELN vendor. So this is oftentimes a requirement for many of the compliance, many of the standards or guidelines, and specifically maybe speaking about the GMP. There's also a requirement that to perform the risk assessment of your processes together with the new tool. So this is something. These points are absolutely you have to bring them up when you are choosing the vendors.
Okay. Can you maybe just from the practical standpoint, could you maybe explain how such a validation looks like, and maybe what are the milestones that basically you have to go through in order to be compliant?
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing to really point out at the beginning is that I would really recommend to set up, you can call it an ELNA team, right? So that's a team of people in your organization who will be dedicated and tasked to implement the software at your organization or your team. So these are, it doesn't have to be a large team. It doesn't have to be, full-time job for a lot of people, but those will be the people who will be the pushers, who will make sure that that the deadlines are met, who will also be support to other people in your company using the ELN. So, and this it might be a very trivial trivial thing to do, but it can be it can make a real difference between the success and failure of adoption of the tool, even if all the user requirements are, let's say, these boxes are ticked. So yeah, and one of the first tasks for this group of people, this team, should be to create a realistic set of milestones, implementation milestones, right? And if I can maybe point one or two at the beginning. So usually every new tool does bring some sort of, disruption. It's a change actually to your processes. So it would be really good first step to actually map to create how you will map the processes in your existing system to the new tool. So to create this mapping of your processes as well as data, and this will actually point out the gaps, and this actually define the next steps for your the next milestones actually.
I have now some of one of more let's say daunting questions for especially for software that is in the cloud. So what about cloud and validation? The scenario, the time picturing is like maybe we included the software appropriately in the processes as you just described, but then the vendor updates the cloud software overnight, and now the software does something else. So how is this, like, how do these two sort of worlds come together?
Yes, so the updates in the software are, it's something to take in mind, right? So this is, I think, when we are talking about software as a service, so especially if you are buying a service that runs in the cloud, right? Typically, these types of softwares have more frequent updates that, let's say, a software that's running on an instrument, right? However, wherever you will get an update of the system, you will need to revalidate it. So that's another point to include into the discussions with the ELN vendors is how frequent are the updates? Do we have any control of these updates? Should we have a test environment in addition to the production environment, or to the real or live environment, and so on? And ask them if they support you with any of the validation processes for their tool. Sometimes, as I've mentioned before, vendors can have the IQ, the OQ processes or tests written up and made available to you.
Okay. Okay, so let's say that now we chose the software, we bought the software, we implemented it in the let's say validated and compliant environment. What about existing data? What about data that we had on paper? What about data that we had in other systems? So I guess that's a question for both of you, but Bryan, maybe you can take the lead. How do you do it at your department?
So we have actually a specific program within our department that is kind of in the process of doing this right now. And for our particular need, we were able to identify a vendor that it wasn't just software that we were purchasing, but also the actual the scanning would be done by that particular vendor. And so the way that they do it is they would come in, evaluate the files, we'd show them what we have, and they would then remove the files and scan them, and in the process assign metadata to each file, and then that would be uploaded into their, into the software program that we purchased, and this is what we'll be using for all of our legacy data moving forward. And then on the front end moving forward, there's another system in place to digitize all of the future records. So it's two separate, but it works. So
yeah. And what we see sometimes with our customers, again, really depends on the situation. But we see with the customers that they decide to keep whatever legacy system they had, and then just start with the newer projects going forward, which may make sense for you or may not make sense for you. But that's another possibility to look at this. Matjaz, is there anything you would like to add to this?
Yeah, maybe just a general view, right? So you have, when you are starting, it depends how your the level of digitization is at the moment, in the lab. So if you do have data on the paper, that's another story. So you have to take care about the digitization of that, as Bryan pointed out. If you have it in another electronic system, then there's the migration point. But independently of that, there are, I think, three general approaches to implementing a new digital system. Is either you have a choice and say, okay, this is a clean cut, so I'm using the existing system up to this point, and we are completely switching to the new system. So that's the obvious one and the cheapest one. Then there's the gradual approach, where you have the coexistence of the two systems for some time. You finish the project in the old one, you start the new projects in the new one, and then you slowly phase out the old system. Or there is this, let's say, fully blown, we would like to transfer everything into the new system, so you have to migrate, you have to digitize, and then migrate. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that everyone should assess what value does each of these approaches bring to them, because the cost is increasing from the first to the latter. So you really have to assess what good it is to have all the data in new system, and maybe take the opportunity of digitization as an opportunity to simplify our system. Even if it's a regulated system, that's an excellent approach to an opportunity to make the system a bit more lean, because you will have to make some changes in the end.
Yeah. Speaking of lean systems, once I heard, like, as a joke, that a boss in a corporation would threaten somebody that if they don't behave, they will make them GLP compliant. So it's something that compliance is something that doesn't sort of go hand in hand with lean software. So maybe Matjaz, how do you make sure you strike the right balance? I don't know. Is there any guidelines you can give in terms of how not to over-engineer?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and there are two perspectives. So from the perspective of, let's say, the companies, the vendors that are developing the software system, it's always a thin line, right? So, but I mean, my opinion is that the regulated does not really equal complex. It doesn't have to be like that. Yeah, I think that you can, like I pointed out before, so this is a digitization or transition to a digital system can be a really good opportunity to simplify things and to try to figure out how you can optimize your your tools. Some of the ELNs will also could also host the processes that you might, or the documents, even the regulated documents that you have, or the control document set that you have in the paper. You could transfer that into the digital form when you are moving your data or project data as well. So therefore, you will make a better use of the existing digital system and simplify your, let's say, your overall quality management system.
Okay. And maybe the last question of this section, and this is again maybe going to both of you. So how do you measure success? How do you say, okay, this software, the implementation of this software was successful, we have achieved our goals? Matjaz, maybe what would be some guidelines from your end, and maybe Bryan later you can address how you approach this at your organization.
Okay, yeah, sure. So so my answer might be a bit more into the analytical approach. So if you would really like to measure to compare the efficiency of the new system with the old system, first you have to make a baseline measurement. So you need to do the measurements in the old system while you still have it. And then I think that there are two categories of these benefits or efficiencies. One group is this short-term metrics. You can actually set out some short-term metrics or key performance indicators, however you want to call them. For example, you could measure the time required to get the sample result, the time required to generate a report, a time to retrieve data, time to find, let's say, an audit trail related to a specific record, or the time to collect all the signatures or electronic signatures for a specific record. So that's kind of a very concrete examples. And then the other group, which is a bit more, let's say, long-term benefits. They can range from, let's say, measuring the stress level or the well-being of the employees in both systems. So that's a really soft one. Then really related to these times, the ability for the employees to be able to perform work in a compliant manner, not just from the labs or offices, but also from outside of the offices, so remotely, right? And then there's a range of other soft or long-term approaches that might be a bit more difficult to measure. Maybe the last one that I can point out is assessing how the fairness of the data. So I'm talking about this findability, accessibility, interoperability, reproducibility of data. So that would be a few of my tips.
So Bryan, you mentioned already in the introduction about efficiency increases with software. Matjaz mentioned it now. How did you set your goals, your objectives? Is there an easy way to measure the increased efficiency that you get with using the software?
That's a good question, because our focus is primarily research. So our outputs aren't necessarily number of tests performed, or that kind of number of products rolled out, or these kinds of things. So I think primarily for us it would be we'd have a focus on user feedback, because if they're if there's frustration, the software is not usable, it's not doing what I want it to do. That's time that that's time spent, trying to fix a problem versus, doing the actual work that they've been tasked with. And so I think that's one point. And then I guess the second thing would be, at least in the case of the example that I'm thinking of, is that, we'll phase out a particular system, and then it just, it'll kind of be like, well, you have to use the new system. I realize that's not that's not necessarily how we want to do that, but all the time. But if they only have the one option to perform the work, then it's got to be that way. So I think, if we can do that, I mean, the primary, the majority of our analysts, they're kind of happy with, okay, we've explained the benefits and, and kind of train them on how to use the software. Most of them will be like, oh, that's great. Okay, new system, I'll just learn it and get used to it. It's really the negative feedback that we receive that we really want to address and kind of bring them to the point where, where they're also, they're using the software. So, but that, in terms of measuring efficiency, in terms of like the hard analytics, I don't know that we do it like that. So.
Okay. All right, so we're moving to the last few questions. So that's for all you out listening, a good cue to start putting your questions in, because right after these questions, we'll take the questions from the audience. Now we covered, about how to buy, how to measure, how to implement to the lab in terms of, in technical terms. Well, what about, we all know that ultimately it comes down to, will the user at the bench use the software as it's intended? And, if they don't want to, there's always, there's no software that can make them use it appropriately, or, they might hate the software, they might look for workarounds if they're tedious tasks. So, Bryan, maybe to ask you, how do you get the buy-in from the users? How do you make them part of the process? How do you deal with, like, if the user if a specific user is struggling to use the software?
So I think I did touch on it a little bit in the previous question, but I want to elaborate a little bit more on that. Is that, when we're thinking about implementation, we're not necessarily so focused on the typical user. I mean, we'll check off the boxes, like I said. Okay, we've explained the benefits of the new system. There's got to be a reason why we're transitioning to the new system. It can't just be we've decided to use a different system. Like, there's got to be a benefit to efficiency, time, some other metric. And we've all, we're going to provide necessary training, whether that's, in the form of, just a big group presentation or hands-on, but group presentation or hands-on. Like, we're gonna, check those two boxes at least. And that'll hopefully take care of our primary users, and our, the majority of the analysts, I should say. But it's really, the stragglers, maybe the 10%. I don't know about SciNote or other organizations, but in our organization, we have people that are resistant to change. And so we strive to kind of encourage them to, to adopt the new system. And for us, one of the ways that I try and do that is to take, the personal time with that user, and even if they just have a question about the software, like I can really kind of have that one-on-one discussion with them, and and kind of talk them through the software. And usually they appreciate that personal touch, and that really kind of facilitates them moving to the new system. And then one other thing I wanted to mention was like your QMS. So, I mean, I think it's obvious, but we need to write clear quality documents. I mean, a clear SOP or clear work instructions for that software, because that would eliminate a lot of the frustration. And that I think is the number one enemy to adopting a new system, is that somebody goes to use the software, it doesn't work. Okay, that's it. Like I'm done. So I guess to summarize, but it would be the clear quality documents, the personal time with the ones that are struggling, and then just doing your best with with your core system, with your the majority of your users. Okay, I'm doing my best practices for my training, for explaining why this is a good thing for the organization, and why, and probably more relevant, why this is a good thing for the individual users.
Yeah, I really like your point. I really like your point with working with the users, writing them clear instructions. So there is so much, let's say, headache, that with clear instructions and really taking the time initially and trying to figure out this together, it can save you a lot of time and effort down the road. One really good advice I heard at one talk was that one company, I believe it was one of the big pharma guys, they started making, inventing in a way, new positions. So new titles that can be added to your job title. And for example, electronic lab notebook manager, right? So this is something that you as a regular lab technician or lab manager could apply for. This would show up in your bonus as well. But this was a really nice way to get these people that were opposing the change ultimately leading the change, and they had some really nice results to show. So that's maybe another strategy. But yeah, I really like your points, and I can't agree with you more on the creating the clear documentation and processes that are useful, that are not there only for the compliance purposes, but that are practical for the user. And maybe going to the last question. So, speaking of change, the 2020 has forced us all to change. How does this let's say looming pandemic affect the lab software? How do you see this impacting trends in the future? How does this come together?
So I guess I'm going to mostly speak to my own organization, but it has been interesting to watch kind of this transition from at least within my organization, this transition from primarily and kind of an Outlook based system. That's why I said at the beginning, like it has really shined a spotlight on these collaborative softwares and the project management softwares, did the digitization of processes, like how can we put this in a software form? Because I think for a lot of our users, they a lot of their work was performed just within Outlook, I'll send, an email and get comments on this document. They'll send it, and the document has traveled to dozens of people, by the end of it for, comments and approvals. And I think, the few users that we had who maybe were resistant to transitioning to a new system, in this case, speaking of SharePoint, we implemented that I think a few years back, and they just kind of maybe didn't see the value of it, but COVID has really, like I said, put a spotlight on that, and on the issue of the Outlook, and now you're doing it with multiple documents, and everything is online, everything is impersonal, and it's kind of it's moved things to a space that before, I could bring a physical document and have a meeting about that document. Now it's kind of shown people like, okay, this is the amount of time that this could take in a remote setting, and it's not only shown people like, okay, we have these systems that can save us time, but it's okay, now how do we use the time that we're saving? Like, now I've got to find, whether it's just performing additional work or creating new processes, but it's really created this this opening where before, the time was crunch, it was crunch time, and so I don't know, I really see going forward that that we're going to have these users that maybe weren't as willing before, that are much more willing to transition to a new systems, and probably be more willing to do so in the future. At least that's what I've seen.
Okay, thank you, Bryan, so much. So we the questions are coming in, so we will address as many as possible within the time that we have. If not, we'll try to write you as much as we can afterwards. A few of them are asking the same question. So Bryan, that's one for you. Like, have you completely transitioned to an ELN, and how long did the whole transition? So from detecting the need that you need, let's say in this case ELN, that you need an ELN, to then the final implementation and the use and the transition, how long do you estimate this to take?
So we first identified the need for an ELN about, I think, a year and a half ago, and due to these things come up, but due to different leadership changes and these and also a change in the scope of the project. We went from just for our group to a larger group. We didn't end up purchasing the software until last fiscal year. So we are still in the process of transitioning to ELN, and I think for us, we I think I mentioned it earlier. We do have a couple of customization requirements, so those things are still being worked out. But we definitely hope to transition completely to ELN and away from paper notebooks, probably mid next year. So.
Okay. Here's a really interesting one, Matjaz. I guess that's one for you. So, how can you comply with legal retention guidelines when transferring raw data from legacy systems to a new system? Has any one of you already had experience with it, or useful tips on what to look out for?
Yeah, sure. So first First thing is that I think you need to know what the, let's say, the retention policy for your records is, right? So how much time you actually need to keep the records. Second point would be that you can actually ask a lot of times even the existing electronic systems do have some sort of, let's say, phase out either service or abilities to export data in also in human readable form that can be stored. So that's the second point. And then if you do decide to migrate the data, this might be a bit tricky one. So you might not be able to migrate the all the data that is existing in one system to another one. So our recommendation, I mean, my recommendation would be that if you do go from, in the direction of migrating the data between the systems, that you actually at the end make a validation report, what was actually transferred and what was not transferred, and keep that as a record. But to be absolutely clear on this, I think that's also a question that should be asked for maybe someone who is really working in this field of work as a as a counselor or as a specialist in this area.
Okay, and there is one more question. So I'm required to keep an incremental backup of our LIMS data at my institute. Is it possible to have regular archival backups of our data? I assume this is meant for SciNote. So if so, Matjaz, maybe you can answer.
Yeah. So even if it's not meant just for SciNote, so a lot of, I mean, this is a very important. So the data and the retention policies. So complying with retention policies is at absolute core of the electronic computer system. So a lot of systems do offer backups and SciNote as well. So you can have this backups of your data set to a specific frequency.
Okay. There are some questions left that we didn't get to. Unfortunately, we have to stop due to the hour. We will get back to all of you who wrote us the questions. So we'll get you emails. We'll get you the answers through the email. So that's it for today. Thank you so much, both Bryan and Matjaz, for being here. This is a topic that, as I said, it's been something that we get asked really a lot about. So thank you so much for your insights. Thank you all. Thank you to all participants. I hope you found this webinar useful. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will make the recording of this webinar available. So feel free to share it with your colleagues or with anybody that has similar challenges. I wish you all a nice holiday season. This year, I don't have to lose words how it was, but I hope you get the most out of holidays and be with the loved ones, and hopefully we'll get through this together and be successful next year. So take care to everybody. Best wishes from our team. And again, thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Matjaz, for taking the time and helping us with all your knowledge.
Thank you, Klemen.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everybody, and see you next year.